Welcome everyone today to our webcast, A Winning Combination, 3ds Max and Revit Interoperability with Renu Matu. I'm going to pass things over now to Renu.
Thank you, Corinne. Welcome everyone. The title for today's presentation is A Winning Combination, 3ds Max and Revit Interoperability. I will be going over how 3ds Max and Revit can work together as a team. So I'm your presenter today, as Corinne mentioned. So my name is Renu Matu, and I'm a learning content developer at ASCENT. I have over 20 years of experience in various Autodesk products. Here, specifically at ASCENT, my main work is to write and update the courseware material, including the training guides for various Autodesk software products, such as AutoCAD and other AutoCAD verticals. That include AutoCAD Electrical, AutoCAD Mechanical, Plan Design, and so on. And then I also create courseware material on the Autodesk visualization software products. That includes the 3ds Max and VRED Professional. Now, as always, if you have attended a few of my previous sessions or any one of my previous sessions, you will know that I will be first explaining the topic with the help of the PowerPoint presentation, as you can see on the screen, and then I will also demonstrate the objectives in the 3ds Max software. So let's get started now. So I'll be presenting how to link and reload files from Revit into 3ds Max scene. I am taking the majority of the information from our 3ds Max course. I'll be presenting parts of Chapter 3 of the Autodesk 3ds Max 2019 Fundamentals Training Guide. And in this chapter, this is the chapter where we assemble the project files. It's called Assembling Project Files. Now, I'll be teaching you about file linking and importing files from other applications into 3ds Max scene. But today, I'll be focusing on linking file section, and there also linking a Revit file. So I'll start by creating a new linking preset and modify it and then use the preset for linking the Revit file. I'll also be using a variation of the linked file and then update the linked file in the current Max scene. So the learning objectives are learn how to configure the settings for linking a Revit file. We'll create a new linking preset for that Revit file. We'll also link that Revit file into the current 3ds Max scene using the new preset that we created. And then, ultimately, we'll update the linked file directly in the 3ds Max scene so that you can see the changes that were made in Revit. So before we get into the topic of linking a Revit file, let's first differentiate between linking and importing. So when should we link a file as opposed to importing a file? File linking is useful when you're working on a project and you know that all the design decisions that have not been yet made. So if a source file is likely to change, file linking is the best way to incorporate this data into the 3ds Max scene. As the linked model, it remains connected to the source file. So when changes are made to the source model in the source application, which here it will be Revit, you can then update this changed model into the 3ds Max software to incorporate and display the changes directly. Now, importing a file loses any connection with the source file. And once a file is imported, you cannot reload the changes or upload the changes which are being made in the source application. So the main difference is that the linked geometry remains connected to the source file, and any changes made to the source file can be incorporated in the current 3ds Max scene, whereas the imported files, they maintain no connection with the source file. Now, there are many different files that can be linked. So these files are, you can link AutoCAD files, both drawing, DWG and DXF files. You can load, as you know, Revit files or VT, and you can also link FBX files. Now, in the past few years, a lot of work has been put in by Autodesk into making the Autodesk Revit and AutoCAD, Autodesk 3ds Max software work better together. Both these software products, they share the Autodesk renderer, ART, which is the Autodesk Ray Tracer, and the materials transfer well from Revit into 3ds Max. So the first objective we have is configure the settings for linking a Revit file. So we can link Revit a file by using the link Revit command. And this command can be accessed from the file menu. Once you access this command, once you click on the file in the file menu, you click on the link Revit command. This opens the Manage Links dialog box. You can see it on the screen right here, the Manage Links dialog box. So if you're opening a Revit file with more than one camera view, you are prompted to select the camera view first, and then you can select the options in the Manage Links dialog box. So the this Manage Link dialog box is where you can set the options that will control how the selected file will be linked. This Manage Links dialog box has 3 tabs, as you can see, and they are the Attach, the Files, and the Presets tab. Now let's first talk about the Attach tab. So in the Attach tab at the top of the dialog box is the File button. You can see there. So clicking this button opens the Open dialog box once again. So although once you start the link process, when you said link RVT file, at that time you have been given the option of selecting the file, and that file is listed underneath the file in this drop-down box, right? Drop-down list right here. But you have been given an option of changing that file. So for example, so if you click on the file button up there, the Open dialog box opens up, and you can browse to the folder location and select a different file for linking. So the selected file name, as I mentioned, and its path display in the file drop-down list. Now the Revit preset is automatically selected here because you chose a Revit file. When you choose the .rvt file, the Revit preset is automatically selected. You can change the preset here. The presets that are listed in the drop-down list are already provided with the software, and it also contains the customized presets that you might have created earlier using the preset tab. Once you have selected the required preset, use Attach this file button to link the selected file to the current 3ds Max scene. So that was all about the Attach tab. Now, second objective is create a new linking preset for the Revit file. So I'll be combining a couple of the objectives first, and then explain them to you with the help of the PowerPoint presentation, and then I will take you into the 3ds Max software and demonstrate both those objectives together. So the second objective is create a new linking preset for the Revit file. So as I showed you in the Manage Links dialog box, we had the Attach tab, the Files tab, and the Presets tab. Now we talked about the Attach tab, and as I told you before, in the Attach tab you have the presets. You can choose one of the presets, but you can also use the Presets tab to create a new preset. So this Presets tab, as you can see on the screen now, it lists all the existing presets and contains options for creating new presets. So, and you can modify existing presets, you can copy existing ones, and you can rename and delete them as well. So if you select any of the listed preset, you are provided with the options to modify, copy, rename, and delete the preset. So how do you create a new one then? So if you decide to create a new preset, you do not select any of the presets listed here, and automatically the modify button becomes the new button. So So once you click that new button, it opens the new settings preset dialog box, as you can see on the right side of the screen. And here you can enter the name and also the format. So if you're linking a file for the first time, it is always recommended that you create a new preset. For example, you're linking a Revit file, which has many different views. You can have a predefined preset that is specific to each view that you're linking. So it makes it easier because you have already set all the options in the preset for that preset. Now let's go to the next scene, next slide, and it is the file link settings dialog box. So once you, in the new dialog box where you entered the name and then you also entered which kind of a linking preset you are trying to create, when you say OK, it will give you this file link settings Revit files dialog box, and here you can set all the different options for in how you want the file to be linked. So you can see the screen go over. It has many different areas like the combined entities. You have the objects area, then the geometry area, and the materials area. And I'll be talking about each of these areas separately. So if I go on the next slide, you have the objects area of the file link settings dialog box. Here, in this area, you have the Create Helper at Model or Origin option, which adds a helper object at the origin of the linked file. Selecting and applying transforms like move, rotate, or scale to the helper object applies the transform to the linked geometry together. Then selecting lights and cameras option, it brings in the respective objects from the Revit file that is being linked. Selecting the daylight system, it brings in the daylight system from the Revit file. But in this case, if you're bringing in the daylight system also, before opening the file or linking the file in the scene, it will open the daylight system creation dialog box. And this dialog box, it is always, what it tries to do is it sets the physical camera exposure control to an exposure value of 15. And it is always recommended to select yes to automatically set this physical camera exposure control, which is the best for linking a Revit file and for that daylight system to work properly. So now let's go into the next area, which is the combined entities area. As you can see, and there are different options that are provided in the combined entities area right here, you can see. So you have the by Revit material, Revit category, Revit family type as one object, and do not combine. So if you're using the by Revit material, what it does is it's all the entities that have the same material are combined and become a single object, even though they were created as separate objects in Revit. By Revit category, here the objects that have the same category, such as walls or windows or doors, etc., they are combined into a single object. By Revit family type, objects that have the same family type, such as the wall types, for example, you have the exterior walls, curtain walls, interior walls, etc., they are combined into single object. So this one is similar to the combine by category option, but it offers additional flexibility based on subtypes of the categories. And it also gives you option to select some of the custom family types if you have created the custom families in the Revit software. As one object, this option, it collapses the structure of the model and combines all the objects together into a single object and does not offer you the flexibility of selecting individual objects. Then we have the do not combine, and this option does not combine any objects together. Every Revit object translates into an individual 3ds Max object, giving you too many objects in the scene. Now we have the two more areas. One is the geometry area and the materials area. The geometry area, here we have the curved object details, and it enables you to set the number of segments for the curved entities and also applies auto smoothing to them. Now, you should always keep in mind that, for example, you have created curved walls using the family curved walls in Revit, or the generic curved wall type in Revit. These are not affected by changing the curved object detail. Only those objects that have been created, for example, using an arc. You have created half of the roof as using an arc, and then you have extruded that. Those areas will the curved object detail will be applied onto them. So increasing the curved object detail will make it more smoother and nicer. For example, you have created a curved roof, so that it will make it smoother. But if you lower it, obviously it will make it more jaggedy, and it won't look that nice. So you can use this only when you have created certain objects, like, for example, for interior objects, you have a round table, you have created that, and you're focusing on the interior of that model, then you can use this one. The options in the materials area, they are more important during reload. So if you have modeled, for example, you have already gotten a Revit file, linked a Revit file into 3ds Max, and then after that you applied certain materials in 3ds Max itself. So you do not want those materials which you have already applied in 3ds Max to be overwritten by the materials when you're reloading the model. For example, you made changes to the model, certain other geometry changes to the model in Revit, and you're reloading all those changes. At that time, you don't want those materials to be overwritten. So you can use these ones, these two. What they do is they will maintain the material modifications and in 3ds Max, and they won't be overwritten by the materials applied in Revit. So now let's get into the software demonstration of creating presets for linking a Revit file. So let me open the 3ds Max. So I have the 3ds Max opened here. So first of all, let me link a Revit file. It's a blank 3ds Max scene. So I go into File, and then I say Import, and I have the link Revit right here. And it gives me an open dialog box, as I mentioned, and in the open dialog box we'll have the Revit files. So I have the Revit building one right here. I'll select that and say Open. Now this one, instead of opening the it opened the Manage Links dialog box, but at the same time it's trying to load the file. It'll take a few minutes. As you can see at the bottom, the bar, it keeps moving on, showing the loading process itself. So it'll take maybe a minute or so to load. It doesn't take too much of a time. So yeah, it's going on, it's loading right now, and is the display bar at the bottom is showing. Yeah, come on, come on. So now there you go. So because this Revit file, it had two views in there, the Revit file that I linked. That's why it gave me the Select Revit view first. So I have to select one of the views. I'll select Front Exterior View, and you can notice that Manage Links, I cannot use the Manage Links dialog box yet, and it does not even display any of the Revit views. So when I chose Front Exterior 3D View and I say OK, you can see that the Revit view has been listed here, and then Autodesk Revit, because it automatically takes it the first option of Combined by Revit material. Now what I will do is we'll create a preset instead of using a preloaded preset, we can just go into the presets tab of the Manage Links dialog box and create a new preset here. Now, as you can see, I have not selected any of the presets. If I select, then it will not give me the new option. So, for example, I'll select Combine by Revit Material. It gives me Modify, Copy, Rename, and Delete. So if I go on the top one, and then it changes and it gives me a new, creating a new preset button. So we'll click and say a new preset, give a name. So for example, give name as Revit 1. And then here we'll have to choose the format. So we'll choose the format as Autodesk Revit because that's the file we are bringing in, and say OK. So once we say OK, a new file has been created. So we go and Revit 1, and now we say Modify, and then we get the File Link Settings dialog box. So here we can modify, and based on different settings, we can use it. So it comes up with Do Not Combine. So first of all, I will choose by Revit Material, and then here I'll choose a Create Helper. Maybe I don't want to bring in the lights. I don't want to bring in the daylight system and also the camera. I'll just need the helper. I don't know about if it has curved objects yet, but it doesn't matter if it does just have the walls and everything else. And it's always a good idea to just keep those two selected because we might be changing any of the materials later on. And then at the time, although we get this option again of using the materials, but it's always a good idea. I always use both of those. And say Save, so that in Revit 1, that preset has been saved. Now go back into the attach file and choose the newly created preset. And that's the Revit one. I selected that, and then I'll go and say attach this file. It'll take, again, a couple of minutes to load that file. And it also depends on how heavy your Revit file is, how big it is, and it depends on that. So we'll move it to the side, and here you go. You can see that the Revit model has been linked. And there is the helper right there. And now if you open in the File Explorer, if you want to see, you will see that all the different materials have been loaded. So the objects have been combined by material here. So if you choose one of the materials, you will see that only the objects which might have been created. So for example, I'll say metal deck, that's the deck that is selected. Or for example, any other thing, I'll go chrome. All the objects that were created using metal chrome, they have been joined together. I'll say glass. So only this area has been selected. So how does this help us is that by material, for example, you want to change the color of the glass, for example, you can select all of those objects which has the specific glass material on there, and then using the material, slate material editor here, change the materials, and then it will be incorporated or applied to all of the materials together, all of the objects which have the same material together. So similarly, you can choose glass, and it highlights all the glass objects right there. So this one comes in handy. Not that everybody, all the different entities, all the different combined by entities or combined by wall type, it depends on how you want to modify it, modify the Revit model in here in 3ds Max. That's how you should bring in or link the Revit model. So let's go in, and first I will just detach. Detach means just removing the file. And now I will attach the file again, but I will use a different preset this time. So in the preset, let's go and create a new preset and say maybe Revit 2. And say, again, Revit and OK. Now that Revit 2 is created, I'll say Modify, and again, I'll go back into the File Link Settings dialog box. And now here, what I can do is I can choose different option. Maybe I will use Do Not Combine, and I'll show you how many of those objects will be there in the Revit file that will be linked. So rest we'll leave as is, and I will select both the materials and say Save. So this has been saved. And now we'll go back in there and attach the files. So I'll go into Attach. Because nothing has been listed, I'll say Files and choose Go into wherever I have saved it. So and then so here we have it. So Revit 1, Building 1, and say Open. It will take again a couple. Okay, it's working on it. As you can see, it's loading the file, and you can see down here the progress in the loading file dialog bar, in the loading file bar. And so you can use based on what you want to do or how you want to use that Revit file. Do you want to make changes to the materials, or do you want to make any changes to the categories and things like that? You can choose whichever one you want the combine by. And although this do not combine, I don't recommend it, but there are people who use it quite constantly, because what they want is they want to have control on all the objects this way, and they can organize the objects in their own way possible. So they can get separate objects in, I'll show you what will happen now. The Revit file is going to come as, so Revit 2, and say attach this file. So once it will attach, there will be tons of objects in there. And I generally, personally, don't work like that. I don't get do not combine because we must have chosen the daylight system. So here you go, and you say yes. And now you will see that we have gotten the daylight system. We have gotten the cameras also, and then there is the object, the scene, and now you can see the list of objects right here. There will be hundreds of objects. You can see all those objects. So some people use this option because they want to organize them the way that they want to organize them so that later they know where exactly they have put which object. And it's personal preference how you want to get the files. So I showed you the couple of them. We'll go back and use the Revit one, which is Revit by material, because that's the one for me. So first of all, I'll just go again and say detach. I'll talk about detach and reload later on. So I'm just doing it because I want to remove the file, and then go and choose the preset, Revit 1, which was already selected, and then attach, choose the file again, Revit Building 1, and say open, and right here, once let it attach. It'll take again the same process. So in the meantime, we can just talk about the I can tell you we'll be talking about the detach, the bind, and the attach, detach, bind, and the reload option once we get the file in here. So this will take another minute or so to load it to link, and you can see how how much easily it comes in, and it also maintains all the materials. So that's why do we want to bring a link, a file, a Revit file into Max, is that you can use the different rendering options here in Max. So although Revit also comes with the rendering capabilities, but the options that are provided in 3ds Max are much vast, and you can do wonders here using the different renderers that they have provided in 3ds Max. So that's one of the ways, that's one of the uses of using linking, why we want to link a Revit file into 3ds Max. So taking the advantage of, so go Revit 1 and then attach this file. So yes, we will want to take advantage of the rendering capabilities of 3ds Max, and that's one of the reasons why we can bring in the Revit file. We can also use animation here, and maybe you want to get a building and then you want to create a walkthrough animation or something to showcase different parts of that building or whatever you want to do. So that's why you can bring in the Revit file here in the first place. So here you go. We got the Revit as combined by material, back as combined by material, and you can see that the materials are quite pretty. They come in as is, like there is the transfer of materials from Revit into 3ds Max is quite good. So these, over the years, they have made a lot of improvement in those areas, and it has become faster as well. So let's go back into our PowerPoint presentation. So we did creating presets for linking a Revit file. We already did that, and let's move on. Now we'll update the linked Revit file. So we already talked about the Attach tab and the Presets tab, and now we have the Files tab. And in the Files tab, it displays a list of files that have already been linked to the current scene. So for each of those linked files, the file name along with its complete path location is listed, and also an icon is displayed next to it. So you can see here two different icons, two different types of icons are listed. So looking at those icons, you can determine the current status of the linked file. So the icon with a red flag, it indicates that the linked file has been modified and the file that you're using is not the latest one. So you need to update the file because some modification has been already done in Revit and the file you have is not the latest one. An icon with a paper clip indicates that the linked file is unchanged and does not have any modifications or errors associated with it. An icon with a question mark, it indicates that the file cannot be found at the specified location. So the path that you have given, it might have been moved or removed from there. So if you want to keep that, you have to either detach it or bind it. So when the original file has changed, use the reload option to display the changes in the current scene. Use the detach option when you want to remove the link with the source file. It also removes the file itself. And the bind option, it removes the link with the source file, but the geometry stays in the current scene and becomes explicitly a 3ds Max scene. So right here you have the three buttons, reload, detach, and bind, which you can use to work on the listed files here. So by those icons, you can identify what kind of a file it is and what has happened to the file. Has it been modified, or is it still unchanged, or has it gone missing or something? So next slide. So once you use the detach option is used when you want to remove the link altogether with the original file. So for example, all the changes have already been made and there are no changes coming forth. You know that the design team is done with their file in Revit. At that moment, if you want to make the file explicitly a 3ds Max file, you can detach it at that time. So what it does is it removes the link with the original file. No, you can use the bind option at that time. So what bind option does is it will remove the link with the original file, but the geometry stays in the scene and becomes a part of the current scene with no connection to its original file. What the detach does instead is it removes the link, but it also removes all the geometry from the 3D scene. So for example, you have done whatever was to be done in 3ds Max, and you also rendered an image and everything else, and you don't want to keep the file with you. At that moment, you can use the detach option. So these are the two options, the detach and the bind. But today we will be showcasing the reload option. So so here you can see once the file has been gotten, it is the same file that I showed you already, which we applied the presets to and gotten in the software. So just pay attention here. I wanted to put your focus towards this area here, because we will be reloading a file with certain changes which were made in Revit that we had added to windows right here. And that's why I wanted to give you first a good look at the Revit linked file. So once you choose the reload option, what happens is that in the Files tab, once you use the reload option, the File Links Revit File Link Settings dialog box opens again. But you have to notice that there are a little bit difference between this File Link Settings dialog box and the File Link Settings dialog box which was used while you were creating the preset. So at that time, you had this Combine Entities option. This is not anymore available to you for use. You cannot combine entities. If you had combined it by material, they will stay as material, by Revit material as well. The only options, you also are not given, you cannot change the file here. The file option has been removed, and this file stays because this is the one that you are modifying now. The settings of that file you are modifying. But you can still select lights, you can select daylight system, and you can select cameras. Maybe first, when initially you linked the file, at that time there were no cameras in there or no daylight system in there. Now, after you have done your initial work on the Revit file in 3ds Max, the Revit team, the design team, they added the daylight system after that. So you can incorporate that daylight system now. Again, if you have added some portions where you have changed from a square to an arc, to an arched roof or to something else, or you have added some tables inside which are round, at that time you can choose now the curved objects detail option again. And again, as I mentioned before, the materials option, if you have already applied or modified some of the materials in 3ds Max, you do not want the 3ds Max materials to be overwritten by getting the updated Revit file, because if you do not choose those two options, it will override the materials as well. But if you choose those two options, the materials will stay in 3ds Max, whichever materials you had applied, only the geometry will come in. And the rest of the rest of the objects will come in. Like if you choose the lights or the daylight system or the cameras, and also so on and so forth. So let's get back to the next one, and this here you can see that this was the originally linked file on top I showed you before also, and then this is the linked file when it was reloaded. So what we did was in the Revit file we added 2 more windows, and then these were updated in 3ds Max scene itself directly. So let me go in and demonstrate it to you. So this is the linked file now, and we already linked it. And as you can see, there are no 2 windows right here. So we have a different file in which we added those 2 windows in the Revit model. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the Windows Explorer and change those 2 files. So I can show you what I'm doing. So these 2 files, I have gotten them from here. So these are the Revit Building 1 and the Revit Building 2. So till now, I linked the Revit Building 1 file. So to show you the changes, this Revit Building 2 is the changed file in Revit already. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this to old, so that I can change the other one. And this one I will change into Revit Building 1. So that now the Revit Building 2, which has the 2 windows, becomes the file. So let me go back here. So then I made the changes. Now, if I go into the Manage Links dialog box and go into the Files tab, you will notice that this turned into a red flag. It wasn't red flag. I should have shown you earlier, but I can show you later on. It will change back to an icon with a clip later on. So right now it has a red flag, and which shows that this file has been changed. So what we can do here is we are going to reload this file. So selecting the file, and I'll say the reload. When I click the reload button, it should give me the filing settings dialog box again, because it's trying to reload the file. And you can see again, it goes in, and all the progress that it's making to load the file again is shown in that bar down there. And although it's pretty faster, it still takes a couple of minutes or it depends on how heavy your model is in Revit and how many like materials and how much of more information is there. So based on that, and also it also depends on the on your processor, because how fast it is. So as you can see, this file link settings Revit dialog box is given again, but you will notice that there is no file. We cannot change the file because the file has been set here, and I don't get that option of combined entities anymore. It's been grayed out. You cannot change those. Although I can bring in the lights and the cameras, so we can do that, but let's not do it right now. And I want to keep my, because maybe I have applied the materials, although we did not do that, but we can still keep it as is because it will not overwrite the materials that were used that might have been changed in Revit. And also, it will maintain if we had made any changes to the materials in Max, 3ds Max scene, we do not want them to be overwritten. So when we say OK, again, it will start reloading again. It'll take a couple of minutes again, and so hopefully this has been quite a useful presentation to link because a lot of people, I can talk about a little bit about why the FBX file, we still have, there are people who are still using as an export in Revit. So originally when this all started, at that time we had to export the Revit files to FBX file and then link that, get that FBX file, import that file into 3ds Max. But then once they started, once they introduced this link Revit file option in 3ds Max, Autodesk introduced this one. Since then, like it's not necessary for you to export it in Revit to FBX and then import it in here. You can directly, this made it more smoother and more easier now, direct linking of Revit file into 3ds Max. So here we go. So now you can see that this icon has changed because the present icon it shows is the updated file. There is no change to the Revit file. And you can see the new file has 2 windows right here. And this is so easy, like in 2 seconds we got the updated version of the file in here. And you can see also that it has maintained the materials from Revit, and the geometry also comes in very clean and nice, and it doesn't take that much of time also to link a Revit file. And as I mentioned before also, it is to take advantage of the robust rendering system or the renderings, various renderings. Now they have introduced the Arnold renderer in 3ds Max to make use of those advanced options in rendering. You can use link the file in 3ds Max. There are other there might be other reasons also, but I think this is one of the biggest reasons to link a file. So I showed you the demonstration already, reloading a linked file, and here you go. So what I did was I rendered that file. I have already rendered it. I didn't want to render it in the class now because it would take me, and it took me another 5-7 minutes to render this file. And you can see that just without making any changes. I have not made any changes to either the materials. I have just, and not to the, even to the rendering settings. I made no changes to the rendering settings as well. I just applied, I just didn't apply anything here and just rendered the scene. And you can see it is a pretty decent render that we have gotten already. And then now from here, looking at the rendering, you can just start modifying. You can maybe beautify it by adding different kinds of materials in here and whatnot. You can do all different kinds of things to the file here and make it look beautiful and stunning. So to summarize today's presentation, we created a new link preset for a Revit file. We linked the Revit file into the current 3ds Max scene. We explored the detach and the bind options. We reloaded a variation of the linked file, and we checked the status of the linked file. So with that, the 3ds Max 2019 Fundamentals Learning Guide that I got all the information from today, it's already available for you to order. It's like all other ASCENT learning guides. This guide has an Autodesk authorized publisher branding, and this learning guide has the typical ASCENT layout where each chapter has the learning objectives to help you understand what you will be learning, and then at the end of each chapter, the chapter review questions are provided to quickly review and refresh what was learned in the preceding chapter. An appendix is also provided at the end of the training guide that helps you to prepare for the 3ds Max Professional Certified exam. The guide is also available as an instructor guide, which in addition to the regular learning guide also contains the answers for the chapter review questions. It also gives you the suggested timing that is required to complete each chapter in the training guide and estimated timing to complete each chapter. If there, with 3ds Max, there is no overhead slides yet, but we are planning to create overhead slides for that too. So with this, I'm going to hand over to Corinne now.
Wonderful. Thanks, Renu. Actually, you covered a lot of this slide on the previous slide. This is just letting people know, in general, the different types of learning formats that we offer. So, again, we have the learning guides, as Renu mentioned. We have our e-books. We have e-learning bundles. We have our instructor guides. And if you're looking for larger quantities, we have digital site licenses. So if you just want to skip over to the last one, I think you've got our contact information we'd like to leave everyone with. So if you need to reach out to us, feedback@ascented.com is a great email address to use that reaches a group of people here. So if you have any questions or any comments about this webcast or even ideas for future webcasts that you would like to see or future learning guides, you can email us there at feedback@ascented.com. Our phone number is up there. And of course, all the materials that we sell are available on our e-store, which you can get through our website or go directly to ascentestore.com. And we also have training materials available on Amazon as well. So I just want to, we'll leave the slide up here, and I just want to thank everyone today for coming. And Renu, I want to thank you especially for this very informative presentation.
Thank you